In this segment, I want to talk about saliva problems. Again, with bulbar ALS, saliva is the Achilles heel of ALS, and a very, very, very difficult problem for the pals to control. Once the pals is no longer able to swallow their own saliva, they start choking and aspirating, and the choking and aspirating just get worse and worse. And it's very difficult on you, as a caregiver, and it's of course extraordinarily difficult on the pals. Suction machines, they will certainly tell you that you need a suction machine at home, and suction machine helps, but it's a real short-lived solution. It lasts, 15-20 minutes, and then the saliva buildup occurs again, and the pals is again aspirating and choking. I've experienced with my wife some very serious choking incidents, just choking on saliva and aspirating on that saliva. So it's something that you got to be aware of with bulbar and ALS that you're probably going to have to deal with. It was my experience, and it's been the experience of others that I've talked with, that when the saliva problem gets really out of control, this is a benchmark that you're really reaching one of the final stages of ALS. There's medicine that they'll probably recommend, like glycopyrrate. Glycopyrate is a pill that, again, can be crushed and put through the feeding tube, which tends to dry out the saliva glands so they don't produce as much saliva. Again, it's a solution that sort of works. Eventually you increase the dosage on the glycopyrrate, but it's not a solution that's a cure-all. It's just a Band-Aid on the situation. And eventually you reach a maximum dosage that you can give, and the pal still is having a saliva problem that's difficult to deal with. They may, the doctors may authorize and give you a prescription for atropine, which comes in a small bottle, and it's just drops that you put into the patient's mouth, again, to dry out the saliva so that the saliva isn't flowing. The problem that you're facing, of course, is the more you dry the patient out, the more their mouth feels like the desert, and so they're uncomfortable with dry mouth. So you've got a terrible balancing problem between drying the patient out so much that they're uncomfortable with dry mouth versus not drying them out enough so that they're choking and aspirating on their saliva. Very, very, very difficult balancing act to try to deal with. Eventually, most of the pals, again with bulbar ALS, end up keeping a washcloth in their mouth all the time, a dry washcloth in their mouth, or maybe a slightly damp washcloth which doesn't produce any liquid but gives their mouth some relief from the dryness that's being caused by the medicine. The washcloth is very difficult for visitors to see because the pals is sitting there in front of you with this washcloth, biting down on a washcloth all the time, and I find it was disturbing to a lot of visitors seeing my wife in that situation. They did talk to us about Botox injections directly into the saliva gland. I'm only mentioning these things because they're things that you can ask about. Again, this is medical things. I'm only making aware that there's these options available, and you need to talk to the doctor about whether or not they're appropriate or whether the pals wants to do them. Very complicated problems. Another thing is scopolamine patches. Again, just a way of delivering a medicine that will dry out the saliva on a more gradual basis rather than a pill where the effect is high and then tails off, where the medicine is delivered more evenly over a longer period of time. The other problem that you're going to face, which I have to face at the end, is the saliva production versus feeding. My focus was maintaining my wife's weight, And so I put a lot of energy into making sure that she had enough calories and enough liquid, that is water, with the feeding material every single day. But the amount that I was giving her was maintaining her weight, but it also produces a lot of saliva because it's liquid. And eventually you have to face the terrible problem of deciding that in order to resolve the saliva problems, I have to cut back on the amount of liquid that the patient or the PALS is getting. And that's a very emotional, a very difficult decision to make, because you've spent, months, if not years, trying to maintain the patient's weight, and now you're being told that in order to address the saliva problem properly, you have to cut back on the amount of calories that you're giving the patient. So it's a very, very, very difficult juncture that you may have to face with bulbar ALS.